A reading from the book of Exodus. Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. Leading the flock across the desert, he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There an angel of the Lord appeared to Moses, in fire, flaming out of a bush. As he looked on, he was surprised to see that the bush, though on fire, was not consumed. So Moses decided, I must go over to look at this remarkable sight and see why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw him coming over to look at it more closely, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. God said, Come no nearer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. I am the God of your fathers, he continued, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. But the Lord said, I have witnessed the affliction of my people in Egypt, and have heard their cry of complaint against their slave drivers. So I know well what they are suffering. Therefore I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, and lead them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Moses said to God, But when I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, if they ask me, What is his name? What am I to tell them? God replied, I am who am. Then he added, This is what you shall tell the Israelites. I am sent me to you. God spoke further to Moses. Thus shall you say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Thus I am to be remembered through all generations. The word of the Lord.
Our responsorial psalm is number 665, Loving and Forgiven, number 665.
Slow to anger.
from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all of them were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was the Christ. Yet God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the desert. These things happened as examples for us, so that we might not desire evil things as they did. Do not grumble as some of them did, and suffer death by the destroyer. These things happened to them as an example, and they have been written down as a warning to us, upon whom the end of ages has come. Therefore, whoever thinks he is standing secure should take care not to fall. The word of the Lord.
Thank you, God.
Some people told Jesus about the Galileans whose Pilate had mingled with the blood of their sacrifices. Jesus said to them in reply, "Do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way that they were greater sinners than all other Galileans? By no means. But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did. Were those 18 people who were killed when the tower at Siloam fell on them? Do you think that they were more guilty than anyone else who lived in Jerusalem? By no means. But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did." And he told them this parable. There once was a person who had a fig tree planted in his orchard. And when he came in search of fruit on it, but found none, he said to the gardener, "For 3 years now I have come in search of fruit on this fig tree, but I have found none. Cut it down. Why should it exhaust the soil?" He said to him in reply, "Sir, leave it for this year also, and I shall cultivate the ground around it and fertilize it. It may bear fruit in the future. But if not, you can cut it down." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
This morning's Gospel is part of the age-old discussions had when bad things happen to good people. Our blessed Lord hit his listeners right between the eyes with two current events of his day: the Galileans who were killed by Pontius Pilate, and those who were killed by the tower at Siloam. Pilate was governor of Judea. Pilate and his way of government were vicious. Visions of the movie The Passion of the Christ come to mind. So for Pilate to have ordered a murderous bloodshed of Galileans was commonplace, prompting the wrong question: why is God punishing us? The tower that fell, to which Jesus was referring, was the tower that guarded the aqueduct just beyond the southeast corner of Jerusalem, and when it fell, it crushed 18 people, prompting the wrong question: why is God punishing us? Now, the early wisdom of Israel had operated on the premise that God rewards the righteous and God punishes the sinner, so that misfortune matches sin and happiness matches doing good. Their wisdom had been in crisis, however, at least since the time of the exile. After the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem in 587 BC, the faithful remnant of Israel was exiled right alongside the unfaithful of Israel. But it was not just the people of Israel as a society who suffered in private life too. It was becoming more and more apparent to them that cynicism pays and that the righteous man is doomed to suffer in this world. There have been many who have tried unsuccessfully to explain why bad things happen to good people. The idea that God gives people what they deserve, that our misdeeds cause our misfortune, is a neat and attractive solution to the problem of evil at several levels, but has a number of serious limitations. It teaches people to blame themselves. It creates guilt even where there shouldn't be. It makes people hate God. It makes people hate themselves. And most disturbing of all, it just doesn't even fit the facts. The problem is, this line of reasoning isn't really meant to help the sufferer to explain away his suffering as much as it is primarily to defend God, who, objectively speaking, does not need to be defended. Some interpret tragedy as a test from God. Parents of dying children have been urged to read Genesis 22 to help them understand and accept the unbearable cross of burying a child. In Genesis 22, God ordered Abraham to take the life of his son Isaac. And scholars put forth that God tested Abraham in this way, knowing that Abraham would pass the test. And therefore, God only sends such tests and afflictions to people he knows can pass the test and are capable of handling them, so that they and others can learn the extent of their spiritual strength. It's the old saying that God never gives us any more than we can handle. Well, if this line of thinking were true, that God is testing us, then he must know by now that many of us will fail the test. All of the responses to tragedy that have been considered here have at least one thing in common. They all assume that God is the cause of suffering, and they try to understand why God would want us to suffer. Is it for our own good? Is it a punishment that we deserve? Could it be that God really doesn't care what happens to us? This kind of logic, or better yet, this kind of illogic, leads to only one place: Noor. From time to time, you'll see Noor, N-O-I-R, as graffiti. When I was pastor at St. Benedict, someone spray painted Noor on the front wall of the church. Noor is defined as crime, cynicism, that which is bleak, suggestive of danger or violence. And those who use Noor as their signature delight in the illogic that is as limited as the arguments that I just cited. They delight in the despair that would be created if the limited illogic of God were true. The truth of the matter is Noor, spray painted on a Catholic church, is a very weak attempt to replace hope with Noor. The Catholic Church represents and provides hope every day to billions of people around the world. And the graffiti was spray painted on a church that teaches that there is another approach to Noor, and that approach is found on the inside of the church, in the Eucharist, in our Blessed Lord. Maybe God does not cause our suffering. Maybe it happens for some reason other than the will of God? The answer to the question, why do bad things happen to good people, maybe has yet to be determined. The answer has yet to be determined, but you can rule out the answer is the will of God. Bad things happening in this life are not part of God's chastisement. God's mercy comes across loud and clear in this morning's parable of the fig tree. No punishment from God in this life. Punishment as a consequence of sin, yes. You speed, you get a ticket. You get caught, you get a detention. It is what it is. What we do know is tragedy, hardship, and suffering are opportunities to prove character. Why? Because that's the way we're wired. Her husband took faithful care of her for the 7 years she was diagnosed with cancer. It was hard, but it proved his character to live up to his marriage vows, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. It's how he is wired. And why is her husband wired that way? Because we are created in the image of God, and Jesus is wired that way. Our crucified Lord is wired in the exact same way. So when the chips are down, when all seems normal, come to church, receive Holy Communion, God in your hand, God in your heart. Because the church will give you someone to hope in. And that someone will give you all the hope that you need, all the mercy that you need, and all the time that you need.